When does a distributor start paying a filmmaker, and how often can a filmmaker expect payment?
So on a typical distribution deal, the first 2 years, the filmmaker will get reported to quarterly. So every 3 months, right? That's generally what happens. And then thereafter, it's usually every 6 months for the next 2 years, and then once a year for going forward. So generally the way they do it is they report the first quarter, and then the payment, that if you're owed any money from the first quarter, it gets paid at the end of the second quarter. So it's usually shifted 1 quarter later. So if the first quarter is, say, 90 days, you'll get paid at the end of the second quarter 180 days from the first quarter payment. That's generally how it's done. And you just, I mean, you can ask for it before, but they generally won't do that. It's very standard practice to do it that way.
What's the typical length of a licensing deal?
Well, there's a distribution deal. I mean, distributors now are asking for crazy long deals. I mean, I like 3-year deals. Distributors who are listening to this would laugh and say, yeah, you're kidding. So I'd say 5 to 7 years is a typical deal. Distributors are asking for 15 years, some of them. I shake my head and roll my eyes and say, you're kidding. But filmmakers do it because they don't know any better. So they'll do that. I don't think it's a good idea to do more than 5 years unless there is like I say, a threshold, performance thresholds built in. Sometimes I'll do, say, 3 years with auto renewals based on hitting certain performance thresholds. So if they hit this certain level, then it automatically renews for another 3 years. That's a fair deal also, because they're hitting targets and you want to continue to do business with them. But you don't want long terms that tie your film up forever, especially with no outs based on performance.
What happens when a distributor goes out of business?
It's tricky. It's like when any business goes out of business. You become a creditor and you stand in line with all the other creditors, and it's messy. Really, really messy. It's like any, receivership situation, or worse, because sometimes they don't even go into receivership. They just disappear and you can't even find them. So that's why you kind of want to deal with reputable companies if you can, and hopefully they have enough business acumen and wherewithal and staying power that, even if they do run into trouble, they can get through it. But, when a small company goes out of business, there's nothing left and there's nobody to even sue for anything. And by the way, if you're going to do a lawsuit, it'll cost you more than what you're probably going to collect.
Sure. So if it goes into some kind of a bankruptcy proceeding, then you can apply to be one of the creditors.
Yeah. Well, you automatically are a creditor. I mean, if you have a distribution contract,
okay.
You have to, they'll contact you, you'll fill out the paperwork, and, you'll say that you want to, it's a typical receivership situation.
Okay. But for those who've never been in that situation, then if a company goes into bankruptcy and your name is in their books and they have a contract with you, you would automatically be on the court paperwork?
Okay, well, here's the key. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned this. The key thing with the receivership, bankruptcy situation or receivership is getting your money is going to be if there's money owing to you, it's going to be almost impossible to get it. It's super, super, super tricky to get through that, and it's super messy. Make sure you get your rights back. The key is that you got to make sure that the contract, generally all distribution contracts have a termination clause that would be considered a substantial, or I forget the word, breach. Like forget the legal term, a big breach. And so a major breach. So therefore it would automatically terminate the contract, the deal, and your rights would come back, but you need to make sure that you paper that you document it, that the contract's been terminated and you have the rights. Because otherwise those rights could sit in receivership forever.
Oh, wow.
and what we call chain of title could get muddied, and therefore you won't be able to sell it to anybody else because you won't have a clean chain of title.
Hadn't even thought of that.
That's the most important thing.
So even if a company is defunct, it doesn't mean that your rights have been terminated as well as any payments to you.
And it's got to be well documented. I mean, it should mean that. but it might go into some holding pattern or something. Like, I'm not a bankruptcy expert,
Sure.
but sometimes these things take years and years and years to resolve, and you get tied up with it. So you need to clean that up right away before you clean up the money situation.
So then you would have trouble going to a new distributor because you don't have a clean chain of title.
That's correct.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, because they'll see that, potentially there's somebody else. The receiver, might have the chain of title. I mean, somebody might buy that company out of receivership because they want those contracts.
Wow.
That happens, actually. That's very common. I mean, there's value to those distribution contracts because there's revenue streams coming in. So if somebody can pick up the entire company and the whole library at 10 cents on the dollar, that's a really good deal, and you kind of get screwed.
So if someone came in, but took over their inventory, is your contract going to be those same rights will revert to the new company, or
unless they're automatically terminated, or you have provided for termination, or you claim a breach. Right. I would say that it would be better if you want to deal with the new company in the case of where the receivership is selling to a new buyer. Terminate with the old company and contract with the new company, as opposed to having them buy it out. But you have to make sure you have that term in your contract,
right?
And that's pretty standard. That's one of those boilerplate terms. But make sure it's in there.
Your 2004 film, My Brother's Keeper. Do you still have the same distributor that you did in 2004?
Technically, because that distributor was myself. I self-distributed it. I mean, I owned a distribution company, and I still own a distribution company. So yeah, the answer would be they happen to be different companies. One was in Canada, one was in the U.S., but I own both of those companies. So I would answer that, yes, they're the same distributor. It's me.
Okay. So you haven't had to renegotiate your own contract?
So, for instance, I licensed that movie to many television networks. And primarily they were 3 to 4 year deals when I first did them. So they've expired. Those licenses have expired. And I own the movie. So now I've taken back those rights and I've relicensed them, sometimes to the same broadcaster, but sometimes to a different broadcaster in the same territory. So like if, here in the United States, not that I did this, but like, let's say you license to NBC on your first round. When that expires after 4 years, you can go and license it to ABC. Now, nobody licenses NBC or ABC except for I just use that as an example, okay? But so I've since licensed out a second round. In that case, there's actually a third round. The only long-term contract, and these have all expired. Like I had a DVD, back then I was doing DVDs, right? So there was a long-term, I think it was a 7-year DVD distribution deal, which obviously expired also. So I didn't do physical DVD distribution in my company. I did it when I worked for other people, so I know how it works, but I didn't want to be in manufacturing and all that kind of stuff. So I did a long-term deal with them. They put it out to the marketplace. It's since expired, so I could re-up that with them or somebody else, but there aren't really any DVD sales anymore. So, those rights are sitting idle. And there's some international deals so basically I have taken back all the rights on that film from what I licensed the first time around. I made some other deals, a fraction of what I did the first time around, because like I said, most of the good deals are done in the first round. Once a film gets, especially an indie film, if it's a classic, if I had It's a Wonderful Life, I'd license it over and over. Well, that's public domain, but something, Shawshank Redemption, you license it over and over and over and over, and it actually gains value probably. Forrest Gump, all the classics, right? But not indie films. Indie films tend to lose momentum after a while. So the second and third round of licensing, say they're 4 to 5 year periods, tend to get less robust, much less. So you're lucky if you get anything, after the first round.
Unless, let's suppose the original licensing had a star in it who wasn't very well known, and then maybe a decade later becomes A-list talent.
Yeah, that's like finding a lottery ticket in your drawer that hasn't expired yet.
It's just a thought.
No, it's great. And it does happen.
Okay.
It does happen, and people do it all the time. They say, hey, let's re-release this movie because, all of a sudden, Tom Hanks was a child when we made it, and now he's a superstar. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, it happens for sure.
When a licensing deal expires, what happens? They send you paperwork to renew, Or how does
no.
this work?
You track it. So if you're a distributor or you're dealing with a distributor, you have extensive records. So you have a database. It's generally on a spreadsheet. So, and think of it this, you have all the rights and all the territories. So you say, and all the periods. So, so you say, okay, here's this film. It's Italy, Spain, France, Germany, UK, and I license it to, this broadcaster in France for this period of time. And it goes on to a spreadsheet so that you can monitor when it expires. So that's what all distributors have. They have these huge extensive databases of all the films that they have and all the rights that they've licensed for what periods of time to which contact. And it gets triggered now. It's all computerized. It gets triggered and says, okay, this is expiring. Now it's available for relicensing or doing it somewhere else. And it's very important to keep track of all that because you don't want to do, 2 deals. And you can't. It would be illegal to license, the same rights to 2 people. So you have to keep really good records of that, and distributors do that. I mean, they all have these very, robust, fancy databases that keep track of that. I do it on a spreadsheet. I don't have that many films, so the ones I self-distribute, I'm able to keep track of all those deals.
So you're not only having them keep track of it, but you have your own records.
Well, for the most part, I don't deal with distributors. I am the distributor.
Sure.
So if and when I do deal with a distributor, yeah, I keep my own records because I'm super diligent that way because I care about all that stuff. I want to know when the deals are expiring because, sometimes I shouldn't use this, conveniently forget to tell you. Conveniently. But sometimes they just generally, it's honestly forget to tell you. So I will say to a distributor, according to my records, this deal has now expired, and the license is over and I'm taking the rights back. We're not renewing.
Right, and there's no thing like an auto renew. You know how that's...
Oh yeah, there are.
Oh, there are.
Oh
okay.
yeah, you can write that into a contract.
Okay.
You can say, you can do auto renews if you want. I tend to not do them because there's no reason to, because I'd rather renegotiate something. But some people do them.
Sure. And I'm thinking from the perspective of an independent filmmaker who's not a distributor. How should they keep records and not just wait to get something in the mail or not get something in the mail?
Yeah, they're probably not going to keep records because they don't like to do that. They don't want to be involved in that, and it's not artistic and it's not what they do. So, but it's not that hard to do.
Right. And once you have a couple painful lessons, then you go, yeah, I'm going to start keeping records.
Or find somebody who can keep it for you. I don't know, an accountant, something, I don't know, somebody who doesn't mind doing that kind of thing. It's not hard to do. It's one entry every 4 to 5 years. Right. And you just have to have a trigger point to, you have to look at it, maybe once a month and see what's coming up and just remind yourself.